In this video, we are going to explain about the chapter globalization, and primarily in this chapter we have to discuss the concept of globalization, then its consequences on people's life, especially economic, cultural, social consequences. Along with it, we have to also see how does it impact the India's growth story and how is it related with the uh, Indian culture, Indian economy. So first of all, we need to understand the concept of globalization. Right? In my opinion, that is the word which is most commonly used nowadays. Everybody has a generic meaning. Uh, Somebody considers it from the perspective of their usages, enrichment in life, the variety of products they get from the market, and few of them they derive it from the other advantages, the globalization of education, uh, travel of children from one place to other, uh, to get the variety of goods and commodities. But in the very beginning, uh, this very concept was used around 1980s and 90s, basically in a developing world, when the world market after the Second World War, when the world market had been gradually opening up with the due pressure from the WTO. So various countries, in order to accelerate their growth processes, they had been opening the market and trying to be connected with the different parts of the world. So initially, as you have, as we know that there was a Marshall Plan, which was launched after the Second World War, in order to keep the Western Europe in the fold of America and the United Nations and the various other financial institutions like IMF, WTO, and the various bilateral treaties had been also signed in order to keep that pace ahead. But that was the globalization at a very limited level. So few countries became the part. But gradually, there was a there was an idea, and there was a need of the market to expand it further and try to make the market all pervasive. With this approach, it was gradually traveling to the developing world of Asia, Africa, South America. In spite of the initial resistance from the various social groups, political groups, due to their own political uh, inclination, but somehow this space got maintained. So, if I see the historical context, I think the post 1980s or 1987, it had been gradually picking up in different parts of the world, away from Europe. In India, this journey had begun in 1991. That was the great year of liberalization of the economy, which had been initiated by the P.V. Narasimha Rao under the finance ministership of Dr. Manmohan Singh. So this whole process began there, and then you can see from 1991 to 2022 right now. So we have already crossed 30 years of the process of liberalization, and we had seen the gradual changes out of the globalization. This was just a brief historical context in which we can understand how does it occur and how did it happen? Because earlier, post Second World War, majority of the countries had been highly protectionist. about their economies, highly susceptible about the global power. So it was not very, didn't acquire the fast pace. It acquired the fast pace gradually after the 70s, 80s, and gradually it expanded. And this growth story of globalization really entered into the Asian, African, and South American region later on. But how do we define this concept? So this concept can be defined in a very simple term. It can be said as a global interconnectedness. So it's a variety of the countries. Through various processes, they can get interconnected. An interconnection of what kind? There should be flows of things or the commodities, ideas, and people. It should happen through both ways or the multiple ways. There should be the list restrictions on these things. Then it can be called global interconnectedness. Means the global interconnectedness you allow to flow things freely and just keep reducing the restrictions. Gradually, those areas we had put up there, and many countries had subsequently done uh, done those things. So this was the whole idea. So you can say in a normal context itself, it had been the global interconnectedness. In another term you can use it for, it's the multidimensional concept because it's not a one-dimensional. You can't confine it in terms of economy. Economy is the one of the aspect which is most highlighted, but that is not the only one aspect which can be uh, taken care of. Because cultural consequences, then your social consequences should not be uh, kept behind. And if we see totality in all the dimensions which can be brought in here for a discussion, that makes the idea of the globalization and its interconnectedness very important. Then the other question arises here: does this globalization does it the concept? First, it's a multidimensional concept. Second is it's a global interconnectedness. Third question arises: is the globalization happening right now? I'll discuss that thing in detail when this will go to discuss the next topic. But I'll briefly explain here because this is a very normal question which arises. Globalization is a lifelong process. We call it global because it appears to be global right now due to the help of the technology, due to the initiative, political and economic initiatives of the various countries. And at the same time, all the big political institutions like United Nations and other organizations try to make effort in that direction. So all these things got combined together and it is all pervasive and can easily be seen and can easily be distinguished. Therefore, but the globalization had also taken place in the past, even a few centuries ago, because people had been coming from one country to the other, had been invading one region, had been trying to just take some kind of the commodities from one place to the other. Various ideas came across from one country to the other. Many renowned travelers like Vincent, uh, Marco Polo, mm, and many others had traveled across the world. So it was also the part of globalization, but it was so slow because it was very difficult at the time to connect the world because we had a very the least number of methods of communication. Today we have a large number of communication methods, which is sharper in approach due to the advent of internet, mobile technology. Then you have transportations like and the communication due to the aeroplane. Uh, easy travel from one place to the other. Then the idea and the you can say the cultural aspirations to go and see the world around. So all these things started shaping up together, and that had made the mobility of all kinds quite fast. That's why it is that's why these terms came into the vogue, and we are using it extensively. So we can say now globalization is not a process which has started right now, only because it has caught the limelight due to its fast pace and the vast expanse of, in the different parts of the world. Otherwise, in a slow process, it had been happening across the world since time immemorial. So there should not be any doubt about that. But yes, we can say this term had been recently coined and which is being used by the world community quite frequently for that region. So there are so first initial understanding of the globalization. How did it occur in our life? So in 1991, when India started liberalizing the market and started opening for the fast pace of globalization, that time people had seen the new jobs through the call centers, and it had brought the person can attend the call from the different countries, can serve. So it was the service of the license of the services had taken place quite quickly in the very beginning. Gradually, manufacturing also shifted. Manufacturing had also shifted in the different parts of the world, but it has come much later. Like China became the manufacturing hub, but the whole idea of globalization of services started in the very beginning. And basically, the Asian countries had been targeted in the very beginning for globalization of the services because the labor had been quite cheap. The countries like Bangladesh, India, China, and many, you can say the East Asian countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, uh, Singapore became a very a good financial hub for a variety of regions. So you can see how did it unfold. So we can easily understand this unfolding took place due to the various factors. So we can say that initially it was the globalization of the services. And then I talked about the globalization of the manufacturing because you can say that China became the manufacturing hub. Majority of the production in India and different parts of the world is made in China. So that was also one of the very good example, and which is still the manufacturing wave is still rising in the different parts of the Asian continent, and somehow it had picked up a little bit in African nations as well as in some countries of the South America. South America. And third one was the always the conflict of the cultural values with the globalization which had brought in here. What had been the conflict of the cultural values? So like which kind of the music, which kind of the food, which kinds of the courses which had to be preferred. So all kinds of the qualitative values which we had been adding in our life through education, food habits, lifestyles, all these things started getting the propagations through the globalization. But at the same time, it brought a kind of the cultural resonance among the various cultures. People who had been highly traditional in the approach, they have been resisting the changes in various countries. They have been finding it's a bad impact of the globalization in their respective cultures. But on many occasions, people felt the very rational side of the globalization because it had brought in many positive things. People had been finding advantages to take the global pathway, and through that one they can enhance their lives, lifestyles, uh, educational journey, and therefore we could not stop the movement and march of the civilizations on the basis of the global culture. In spite of the resistance of the various countries, various right-wing organizations, we could not do so because this march had not been successfully controlled. We had failed to provide an alternative where the conservative approach and the traditional approach would have been able to provide all other alternatives. So we can assume that globalization in a true sense had been challenging the traditional notions, had been equally availing of and prevailing the modern sense of the lifestyles there. So in a way, I think traditional systems also got evolved under the influence of uh, the global pathways which had come through the globalization. So this was in brief, I can say, the first through these examples you can understand the globalization had been the flow of ideas, flow of culture, ideas, commodities, and the variety of other things which had been understood by the people, essential. And they are still, we are still doing it. We are still evolving um, the various elements of globalization. But there have been some negative parts in different parts of the world. So many resistances had been exhibited. Uh, India had also seen some resistances when the multi-rated outlet had been opened. Um, so many hawkers came on the road and to protest against that. Then the various other groups who had been support of the Swadeshi movement, and at the same time, in the very beginning, the BJP, right now the right-wing organization of India, who had been against the globalizing trend through the economic liberalization. Now, because they became supporter of it, because the entire growth story of this country is dependent upon that. Globalization has also brought in the foreign investments in the country, uh, and that's why it created jobs. It tried to create expanded the business opportunity. Uh, so variety of the things had happened, but we can't say many other things which had happened, which try to challenge the diverse culture of our and tries to homogenize our culture. Somehow they try to homogenize, and sometimes they had added to the heterogenization of the culture also. So in totality, this was the very basic concept of the globalization. I'm trying to bind up here with this note. In the next video, I will discuss the causes of globalization, and then later on I'll discuss the consequence of the globalization. Thank you.